Okay. And the content and the coverage, like it purely depends upon the demand and the current market trends, as Rishika was saying, right? We tend to customize the existing scenarios, or probably the existing tools, whatever that we are actually uh, have it been presented, or probably we conduct the grooming sessions or whatever, right? It purely depends upon the current market trends. As you have seen in the agenda at the moment, sometime which has been flashed across, it has primarily the four important aspects that every individual must be aware of before even getting into any kind of a roles that is relevant to a testing phase or probably to a testing field. So first I'll walk you through the journey of understanding a software engineering, then about the roles and responsibilities of a tester in the software engineering, followed with there is something called SDET, which is hot moving in the market, right? And SDET, as in when we say, right, it comprises of different components and APIs or the tools that are available in the market, like being integrated together, so that will enable for the test engineer, right, to cater the testing service whole and whole. Probably if at all you wanted to facilitate an end-to-end testing service, what exactly a test engineer must be aware of is being precisely will be explained as a part of this curriculum, the whole lot of SDET curriculum. Okay. Allow me to share my screen. I probably make an important pointers noted, and so that it will be easy. So there will not be any kind of points missed around. So I'll always have this habit of making the pointers. So at a high level, if we see, we need to have a complete knowledge, or at least we need to understand on something the software engineering principles, right? How important is that the software engineering and what exactly an engineering is all about, right? See, every different field has its own set of guidelines or a sequential approaches. So similarly, a product which is under development, every organization may choose a particular pattern or a systematical approach in engineering a product. When I say engineering a product, it is simply about developing a product or developing a software product. Now, this concept, or probably this process as such, you see, the engineering process, if you see, it is initially been explained in a systematical approach that has a collection of phases, which we call it as an SDLC, which is software development life cycle. Okay, I would rather call this as a systematical approach. It is a systematical approach on developing a software that is followed by different group of people, right, to develop a software product. When I say a software product to be developed, it is not about only a programmer with the programming knowledge, or it is not about only the clients or the customer who wanted to have a product, right? So this engineering, right, it is group of people with different set of talents, and each one of the role, probably each one of the particular role demands a different type of activity that will enable them to complete this entire development process more smoothly and successfully. It is not I can have only developers who can do everything, or at the same time it isn't enough if I have a business analyst who can gather the requirement and that it is been explained. But for each one of it, right, there is always a systematical approach. So the SDLC is something where individuals will try to understand about how an organization will preferably go ahead and develop the product in this sequential pattern. When I say a sequential pattern or a step by step, right, it is a linear mechanism. It is not the group of people will work parallelly or concurrently and get the product being developed. But there are always we have to understand that we have to take it step by step. And while we move forward, right, the cycle, right? Most of the people would have heard about the traditional models of SDLC, and then nowadays most of the guys speak popularly about agile model, right? It is always important for every person who is working for a software organization should accustom according to the conventional model as well as the agile model. It is because it is not guaranteed that every profile or every project within an organization will always work for agile model. It is because it is popular. Or I cannot say all the conventional or the traditional models which is already available in the market, like be it a waterfall model or a V model or a prototype model, RAD model. There are XYZ customized models. Each one of these model is still being popular or still being used. As again, it has to be very important that the SDLC models, right, are different for different business. I cannot say that the waterfall model will fit in everywhere. It has some flaws, it may have some advantages and disadvantages, but it can certainly fit certain business. Same as the iterative models or the spiral approaches or the RAD model, whatever, right? Even when it comes to agile, the agile model also fits into certain kind of a business or a software product which is under development, and there is also certain parameters where we have to understand that agile will not be fit to be used for certain kind of a business. So what usually happens in an organization, the project manager will take a decision by conducting a careful feasibility study by analyzing the risk, quality, budget, resources we have, the complexity, the time we have. So there are lots of parameters after taken into consideration. The project manager would usually define which SDLC model will fit in better for a business. Now, what does it happens once after the SDLC model that it is been designed, after the feasibility study is conducted and the return on investment is being calculated, they start collating the team, right? And when the teams are being formed, right, we cannot have the talents being categorized based on the people who can fit in to work only for the conventional model or the people who can fit in to only work with the agile model. So at the current market standards, if you see, or the competition that we are looking at, right, they are looking for some feature teams who are being quite capable enough and also do have a caliber who can fit in everywhere, irrespective of what the process is being defined by an organization or by a specific project. So the first and the foremost, whoever wanted to step into any of the software engineering field, be it into a development or to be an architect or probably an analyst or even a test engineer or someone who guy wanted to get into the operations, it is always important for them to adjust their profile or customize their profile so that they can work for any of the development model. Okay. So as such, if you see, there are different models an organization can follow. Okay. So primarily people call it as a waterfall model to be outdated, but we doesn't have to really consider that it is been outdated. There are still some companies who still follows a waterfall model, which they may choose probably it can fit better. So later it has been migrated to a V model. Then people has migrated to the iterative models. Okay. Then about some incremental models, which includes a spiral model, there is a prototype model. So there are lot many other. But yes, people nowadays often talk about only agile model. But it does not mean that rest of all the other models are outdated and it is not important, but each one of the model is important, and all the roles who is going to participate, who is participating in development, okay, need to fit into every model, need to fit into every model. What are those things that is very common across all the models? What are few things that is common across all the development models is nothing but the SDLC phases. SDLC phases. Okay. So all the models do have the common SDLC phases, which initially starts with the requirements gathering. So there is already a feasibility study which would have been already completed, right? Which includes the client stakeholders, the project managers, business analysts. But whereas you will always have a business analyst who is going to gather the detailed requirements of what need to be developed with respect to an application, and he is going to articulate a document over here, which is nothing but SRS. Now, there are again, like, the SRS has been functionally decomposed into multiple other documents like URS or functional requirement documents based on the needs and necessity. But it is only at a high level we have to understand the requirements are being gathered by the business analyst, followed with there will be a team that is nothing but the development team, right? Followed with the operations team. Development team followed with the operations team. When I say the development team, this includes a software architecture. Okay, I use shortcuts, but it is easy to understand. Then you may have a developer. You may also have a test engineer, whom we call it as a QA or a quality analyst, and so on. So now what does it happen? This whole lot of a development team, whatever that I have listed out here, are expected to analyze the requirements. Analyze the requirements. So once the requirements are being analyzed, what are they expected to do? The software architecture, right, is expected to do the designing, okay, which is done by the software architect within an organization. Whereas once the software architecture comes up with a designing, why the designing is very important? Because the requirements which are gathered by a business analyst can be directly used for implementation of a code. Yet, as the requirements are huge in terms of capacity or the complexity, or it can be interrelated, it may be too tough for the development team to understand the structure of the product. Okay, so to understand the flow, connectivity, and there are lots of functionalities that my application may end up having. So what we need to do is that it is always better to have a pictorial representation of the requirements, which can detailedly explain about the flow and the structure of a product. So what a software architect does is that he is going to come up with a couple of design documents, that is high level and the low level design documents, which explains the flow and the structure of a product from the front end, how it looks like, and from the back end. Now, upon having this high level design and the low level design, the next comes is my programmer, right? Who is going to understand what the requirements are either from the SRS or the baselines or from the high level and the low level documents, which will be translated into a code. So we call them as the developers. They can use any of the technologies to develop the product, or if I may say, a single product can use one or more technologies that can be used for its development. So developer is going to do what? He is going to write some code to develop the functionality. What is he going to do? He is going to write the code to develop the functionality. Now, once after he writes the code to develop the functionality, it is always important for the developer to immediately cross-check and verify if whatever the code that it is being written is functionally correct or not correct. So what is he going to do? The developer will also exercise this code by performing something called unit testing, right? So to bring it to the notice, as in we see a testing, there are different types of testing, or I would say the different levels of testing, which is done by different people within a particular development model. Any testing which is done by a developer on the code to verify the syntax as well as the logic of the code, ensure to see it is functionally fit enough, is called as a unit testing. Now the developers can choose to carry out this unit testing, right? Either manually or by automation. There are different tools available in the market based on its own programming language. We have JUnit, right? We have, if it is a technology they have used this as a Java, they use JUnit as a framework. And if the technology used as a .NET, there is NUnit. So each programming language like Python or Ruby or different programming languages has its own set of unit testing components or APIs that are available. So the developer is going to design certain code that can test the code which is being written to develop a functionality. At times what happens, as long as you are working with the conventional model, right? I am going to add a disclaimer over here that if the teams are working, there are different teams, right? The teams working under the conventional model works independently, works very independently, right? We do not really share any kind of the prerequisite unless otherwise there are some metrics that are being importantly need to be considerate. Like now probably we will have some amount of release notes, but yet if I may have to say, in most of the conventional models like waterfall to prototype model, whatever I have listed above, right? The teams work independently. So there is a developer team, they will have a separate development plan, they have that process, build management activities that is independent. So architects will work independently. But what does it happens? The work around whatever they tend to do, right, is being shared with the next team in a linear approach. Okay. This has been slightly tweaked around whenever the team starts working under the agile model. So as again said, we will move forward, but I wanted to add the disclaimer as on when it is needed. Whenever we look forward to understand about the conventionals as well as the agile model, so it will be very easy for us also to discuss. Now, so coming to this unit testing, whatever it is been done though, right? It is not enough to prove or to say the code, what is being designed or developed can fit into the market standards, or it cannot prove that the developer has developed and tested the product sufficiently that can be released. Because one each one of the time whenever they develop, right, it is not that they develop as an integrated build. Probably they develop as independent units or small components. But when we see as a whole lot of integrated module or a particular build, it might not be sufficient enough for the team to go ahead and justify or say the product is working correctly. So I always need a third party intervention who can go ahead and test the product again, but from the front end. Where you see the unit testing, whatever is conducted by a developer is purely on the code. So without even disturbing the code, right? There will be a testing conducted, which people call it as a system testing, which people call it as a system testing, which is primarily done by a testing team or a QA team within an organization. So what is QA team going to do is that they are going to test the functionality of an application. They're going to test the functionality of an application from the front end. Or rather, I keep it simple as GUI, that is graphical user interface, without being intervening into the code. Now, whenever as a test engineer, if you wanted to test the whole lot of an application, right, it may have lots of functional features. There are lots of different aspects that need to be tested. It purely depends upon the type of an application or a product that it is under development, what testing need to be conducted. Now, at the same time, if I may have to precisely say, is the testing a one-time activity? No, it is not. It is a recursive activity which is being repetitively done. And there are lots of aspects whenever you are being testing. The testing is being carried forward in a direction not to prove the application is being wrong, but it is always important for a test engineer to prove the application has been working correctly according to the client's requirements. There is a lots of difference. Okay. So the initial mindset of a test engineer is expected to have the product under test or an application under test is good enough and it is working according to the functional requirements, and there can be some non-functional requirements either implicitly defined or explicitly defined, right? And whenever they are actually testing this, it is not only about certain requirements. So when I in future go ahead and release this product into the market, how my end user or a client can easily go ahead and use the product smoothly and successfully is been completely evaluated or validated by the testing team. Now, if I may wanted to elaboratively see the bigger picture of a testing, right? So this testing as an agenda is categorized into multiple levels again, multiple ways that can be carried forward, and there are different people with different skill sets who is going to perform different tasks to analyze, understand the product, test the product, and then give a release note to say the product is fit to be released into the market. So testing cannot be considered as an easy task. It is because testing is not about you give an input and see an output if it is working well and good. But there is also something called negative testing. There is also something called API testing. There is also something called performance testing. So there are lot many factors or the checklist that it is been precisely made. But to perform all these things, what happens? The team has to work collaboratively, ensure to see the product is working according to the client's requirements. So there is a lots of difference between the program proving and program testing is the primary agenda for a testing team to validate a product or to test a particular product. Once after this is being done, then happens to be an user acceptance testing, right? Where it will be done by the designated business users to see if the product can be accepted by the users. We have site acceptance testing, or the product is again executed by the developers on their environment. And then once it is executed on the end user environment, so this is purely done by the designated business users. Okay, who exactly is the users? And once after they validate, so it is more about executing. There is no much testing being done, but they are going to execute the product and see if it is working according to the user requirements that they have mentioned. And once they are satisfied, the product will be accepted and there will be a release note or an approver note given. And finally, you will have the maintenance activities carried out. So we will have a deployment, and then there will be a maintenance of the product artifacts, followed with the release of the product. Okay, and post release, what does it happens? There will be a casual analysis report, or probably there will be a feedback mechanism, which primarily the teams will be involved, different kinds of teams will be involved to carry out a kind of a research, understand have they done enough amount of activity and what is the status, what are the improvements that need to be considered. So since the time of an inception till the product is being released into the market, there is always that one thing we have to understand, it is always a systematical approach, and it is all about there are different population, or rather I would say the different people with different skill sets is being involved to make the product to be developed and released into the market. Now with this particular discussion, we need to understand how a tester is involved in the whole lot of an SDLC. See, if we look at the conventional models, especially a waterfall model, right? The testers are involved only after the coding. But thereafter, what happened? The models have been more customized based on the project demands. As again said, there is a quality, complexity issues. There are too much of risk that it is been involved. So the test engineer role has been exhaustively been designed such way where the contribution for the development of the product since the time of inceptions or soon after the requirements have been gathered until the product is being successfully accepted by the user, right? Their involvement in understanding the product and then probably supporting the whole lot of a team to design the test plan and define what they are planning to test so that the development plan can be done accordingly. So here, whenever we look at understanding the conventional model over an agile model, right, there are lots of differences. So the conventional model over the agile model, the phases do not change. Please always remember the phases or the activities the development team or the whole lot of a team, what they are going to do will not change. But the only thing is that the mechanism or probably the way of doing may change. The way of doing that activity may change over different models. Okay. So primarily what does it happen?
Hey Jyoti, sorry to cut you in between. Like people are not interested in these topics, right? So is it possible if you can directly jump into the test NG?
I shall do that, no problem. I'm told to give a high-level context about SDF, so I probably I won't. No
Sorry, thank
problem.
you. Sorry for cutting in between, but people are not interested to learn Sdlc.
No,
Thank
no,
you.
my journey was not about SDLC anyways. No worries.
Sure, thank you.
All right. So here, if you see, as again, yeah, if we wanted to quickly jump on to understand TestNG, no worries. Like now we will discuss. Just give me a minute. It is quick that like no individual must be aware of prerequisites. What individual must be aware of. So they must be already aware of the test design activities. Okay. And they must be already aware of something called the test automation that is using Selenium. Well, so now later part we need to understand on how to customize the test code or probably the Selenium code using TestNG as an API. Okay. So if you look at the Selenium code, whatever is being written, that can meet the test automation needs, or probably I can say that can meet the test scenarios. Yet it might not be fit enough or it might not be sufficient. It might not be sufficient to say the code is fit for test execution and test automation guidelines. So always it is important to have, because Selenium being an open source, do not have everything inbuilt or sufficiently to be to carry out an test automation, right? The entire test automation cannot be achieved only with the component or a tool called Selenium. So it is always important for a test engineer who is working with Selenium to fairly understand about a TestNG that can be used along with Selenium. Now, if we look at as a TestNG is an API, is an or is a Java-based API, which is designed based on JUnit as a platform, or rather, I would say JUnit as a background. Okay, so as I've already on the top, I have explained the purpose of JUnit, right? So JUnit is primarily a unit testing framework. Is primarily a unit testing framework where the code is tested for its functionality. The code, whatever that I am actually talking about, is a development code. Now the TestNG is derived or probably designed based on JUnit, which can be used for functional testing the code, right? That too along with Selenium. So there is a lot of difference between the code developed by the developer and the code developed by a test engineer. So the test engineer tend to write a testing code which is used to test the functionality, where the developer will write the code which can develop the functionality. Now, TestNG as an API, right? It has a collection of different classes. The TestNG API has the collection of the classes or an interfaces that will enable the test code, or that will enable the tester to customize the test code, to customize the test code as per test automation needs. So what are those needs, and the necessaries, probably the reasons why we choose TestNG along with Selenium, right? Is primarily, first and foremost, the TestNG will help you to create the crystal reports, because the Selenium do not have crystal reporting mechanism, crystal reports post execution, which is not possibly done only using Selenium, right? So there are different types of report formats can be generated, but however, TestNG will enable you to generate something called the HTML reports that can be in the emailable format, or probably it can be in the independent or a more detailed version of it, which will be generated. Alongside, the TestNG has different types of annotations, which are the whole lot of the test execution, right, is controlled, where the test execution can be controlled well using different types of annotations. But we also need to understand what are the annotations, how are they being categorized, right, and when to use what type of annotations. Not only that, the annotations will also help to customize the code, where the code can be reusable. The code can be reusable, where you tend to create the code once and execute it several times. Execute it, or probably rather I would say use it several times, and execute them in a controlled manner. Then followed with, if you may wanted to trigger something called parallel testing of multiple test codes, we can trigger that. We also can trigger something called the test suite execution. We also can trigger something called test suite execution, where you can go ahead, execute the group of test scripts in an in a suite mode, probably by triggering them to XML. And it also has something, what you can do is nothing but parameterization. Okay, so if you wanted to read the test data to be sourced from the XML file, or probably from an Excel file, or probably you wanted to store them into an object array, right? So the TestNG can promote you to go ahead and conduct the parameterization process as well. Okay, so there are a lot many other things, like now you can carry out some prioritizations, okay, or you can carry out some grouping, then you can exclude or include or enable or disable the test executions or certain methods. So there are a lot many other benefits as such, but these are the few things, the reasons why we prefer to go ahead use the TestNG. Now, I will give a quick snapshot about something called annotations in TestNG. Okay, so annotations are there in JUnit as well, but as again said, annotations are been primarily used as a metadata. Okay, when used by a developer is for a different purpose. So what we have in the TestNG, few of the annotations are contradictory between the JUnit and the TestNG, but the purpose was totally different. What is that going to do? What is that these annotations going to do when it is being integrated as a JUnit API is totally contrast against when it is being used as a TestNG API. And there is primary aspect that I forgot to add, that there is something called assertions. There are something called asserts in TestNG, which is used to validate the functionalities. Or probably I can simply call this as the checkpoints. They are used for as a checkpoints, where it can do some verification of certain functionalities. Okay. So coming to this, the annotations in TestNG, as I've already said, annotations are the predefined classes from the TestNG library, right? So always any method within the test code, any method within the test code can be annotated, will be, or like will be controlled by the annotation at the run session, at the run session. So annotations, right, are used as metadata, for a method. This has been primarily categorized into 3 types of annotations, right, which includes the annotations that are used as test fixtures, the annotations used for test fixtures, annotations used for test cases, and annotations that are used for customization of the test code. When I say within a code, the test fixtures are primarily considered to be the methods that can have some lines of code, that can have the lines of code that executes either some preconditions or some post conditions. Post conditions. Whenever I say a test case, it is all about a method that can exercise, that can validate a functionality within a product, functionality within an application. And the customizations are primarily like which can be used for parameterization and lot many other, but I will take up only the parameterization in this particular context. Okay. So now if you look at any preconditions or the post conditions, which we call it as a test fixtures, that you always wanted to execute, right, within a suite, because there is always a test that has a suite. Within a suite, I can have multiple tests, and each test can have multiple classes, and each one of the class may have multiple methods. So now what does it happen? There is always a need that few lines of code you always wanted to run before a suite, or before a test, or before a class, or before a method. We always need to have the setup methods or the test fixtures to be written that starts the annotations always with @before. Like we have @before suite, then you have @before test, you have something called @before class, and you also have something called @before method. Similarly, if you wanted to have any lines of code that you prefer to run them after a suite or after a test or after a class or a method, we have the respective annotation that always starts with @after, that has @after suite, @after test, @after class, and then followed with @after method. Now, it is always important for individual to categorize from the given functionality of a code that you have been considering, which are the functionalities you always prefer to run before a suite or a test or a class or an after the method, right? And similarly for all the tear down methods that you probably wanted to run them. But always it is important for them to know that it has to be the lines of code, whatever we tend to write here, will not test any functionalities that are being written. Though you tend to use some Java conditional statements, it is well and good, but yet it is not recommended according to the test automation guidelines not to write any kind of a validation criteria over here. So primarily when the code is being functionally categorized, it is always important for you to go ahead and write all the important functionalities under only certain methods that is always annotated as @test, which is a single set of annotation. So any method that is annotated as @test, right? What is it going to do? At the run session, the method below this annotation, the method below this annotation will test the functionality or functionality of the application. So the lines of code to be written always such way. And the annotations that are available over here, which can enable you to do the parameterizations. If at all you wanted to pull the parameter is nothing but a variable that can hold some data. So we have something called @parameters, which will enable you to read the parameter value, right? Parameter value from the XML files. And there is another what I would say, the annotation that is @data provider, which will enable you to read the data, or rather I would say multiple data, multiple inputs from an object array, from an object array. So any method that it is annotated as @data provider, right? Any method annotated as @data provider is considered to be sourcing the test data, to another method which is declared as @test, test. So as such, if you see a TestNG, it is more than the code. It is all about the annotations, and it is all about a discipline, how a test code need to be customized such that it can enable me to go ahead and meet the test automation needs and necessity is being put together in the form of a different libraries, and the libraries are incorporated along with Selenium. And why is it along with Selenium? As I've already said, Selenium being an open source tool, it do not have an inbuilt mechanism to full-fledgedly act as an automation tool. So it primarily picks up all this set of the TestNG as a plugin that need to be configured, and this will enable you to perform all of these set of activities, whatever I have listed out on the top, right? So that it can make my test automation code more smooth and successful at the time of execution. Not only that, the TestNG also has certain features and the functionalities, primarily that can enable, or probably that can enable or trigger the test executions. So whenever it comes to the test executions, you can go ahead and run the individual test, or there is also an option where you can go ahead and run the group of test codes, in the form of different classes that you have written, which we call it as a test suite execution, This test suite execution will have an automatic file that we need to create in the XML version of it. So the XML version, when it is triggered for an execution, it pulls a different code and it starts running them in a batch mode. That is, the group of scripts can be executed. Not only that, through the TestNG XML file, you can also control kind of parallel testing. That is about running the group of scripts parallelly, or whenever you've been running it parallelly, it is not necessary all of them has to run on a single browser. So you can probably trigger also something called cross browser. So the same test can be executed across 3 or more browsers. It's because Selenium being a cross browser testing tool, right? As again said, it do not have an inbuilt mechanism that can run parallelly all the browsers at one go, where the product cannot be deployed or executed and then validate. So what we do, we always use them along with TestNG that can trigger the test execution parallelly. Okay. So these are the primary advantages of using TestNG along with Selenium. So always whenever we go ahead and write the Selenium as a code, it is always important for us to use one of the testing framework, TestNG, to fulfill the test automation needs. So probably I think I wanted to hold this about the TestNG over here, and I leave the forum open for the questions or to the DevLabs team probably to handle it.
So now I am unmuting everybody for the question and answer round. So guys, you can ask questions one by one.
Afternoon, everyone.
Hello.
So
Hey,
guys, if
Jyoti.
you have any question, please ask.
Hi, yes, I have.
Yeah.
Ma'am, what is conventional model? What is all about?
Conventional model, it is more of typically like, which is the linear approaches and which has been more strategical and then hierarchical, right? Like, which is quietly very indifferent from the way agile models are being exercised. The rules and the regulations or the teams, like, preferably who is going to work under the agile model may be slightly indifferent.
Hmm. Yes.
Hello.
Yeah, who's that?
So I wanted to know if TestNG has a capability of test scheduling.
Sorry, I could not understand that question. Could you please repeat it?
Does it have a capability or functionality of test scheduling? For example, if I want to run my test at a certain time, or is it possible?
TestNG alone, it cannot be really able to do that, but this can be triggered along with Jenkins Maven, and the test execution is scheduled along with CI and CD engine, for which one has to be aware of CI CD along with Jenkins. Then the execution can be test scheduled. TestNG alone isn't enough. It always needs some supporting tools and it need to be pipelined.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Will you ever have a course on CDI pipelines?
The SDET course includes a CI/CD as well. Probably, as I see most of the participants are interested only in TestNG, I have to quickly jump in. If I would have been given a chance, I would have also explained the whole structure of SDET. Probably that was my upcoming, but I think I did not get a chance to speak. Yes, the SDET curriculum includes CI and CD on how to trigger the test execution from the Jenkins.
So in SDLC curriculum, we are covering CI/CD, GitHub, Jenkins, integration of Jenkins and TestNG framework. Not only the TestNG framework, we have a page object model framework as well. That is part of the curriculum.
See, when I say page object model, TestNG and everything, right, it is part of Selenium. It is used along with Selenium. But however, the execution frameworks or the environment are slightly indifferent. I think that should be corrected. So whenever we learn C Selenium, it is about Selenium, TestNG, and Apache Maven. All these things is a single component, right, which enables you to complete your test automation process. TestNG alone isn't enough for anyone to automate, or at the same time, Selenium alone is not enough. All these things to be perfectly stitched to complete your test automation. Unless otherwise, only TestNG is, I would say, I would say that 20% of customization is what the weightage that we probably give.
Hello.
For the whole automation as we see.
Yeah. Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jyoti, can you just explain the parallel test executions by example?
I doubt if I
If it
really
is,
have so much of time, like, probably to show you a demonstration on the parallel execution, but rather I can show you some code. I cannot run them right away because this is going to take lots of time and explanation as well.
okay.
I can simply trigger a code. Meanwhile, like, while I take some time to launch, are there any other questions? Pratik, I'll come back to you. Just hold on for a while.
Okay, yes, ma'am.
So let's switch to the next questions.
Hello.
Please tell your name and proceed with your question.
Yes, my name is Masakal. I wanted to ask, is it possible to link TestNG with Excel directly without using the data provided?
So is the question about can we use TestNG without using any other components or APIs?
Can you link it with the Excel for parameterization without using a data provider object?
Okay. To understand this question.
By the way, can you hear me? Hi.
Yeah.
Hello. Can you show the what's the name? Explain some code, and can you run in a CLI or terminal as well? Thank you.
Ketan, were you there on the call?
Yeah. So, Rosa, please repeat the question again.
Okay. Can you show the simple code and try to run on CLI or terminal as well?
Okay. So basically, Rosa is saying, can you showcase running a sample TestNG script on terminal or any IDE?
CLI.
Probably I'm launching the
Terminal.
IDE. Allow some time. Allow some time. Let the IDE start, and then probably I'll trigger the execution.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
So any more questions, guys?
Hi.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Preeti. I have a question. Could you please tell me what is JUnit, please?
Like how you have TestNG, which is used for validating a code. A JUnit is a different API and another API that is used by a programmer or a developer to validate the code. I mean to say unit test a code. So that is actually being designed such way. It has some the same way annotations and everything that will be used by a developer to unit test a code or to see if the code works according to the functionalities, or probably there are some code coverages need to be estimated. So probably that is used by the developer.
Okay, thank you.
So the TestNG and the JUnit, often people get confused because of its similarities, but the purpose of utilization is totally contrast. JUnit is used by a programmer to validate a Java code, whereas TestNG is used by a tester that is used for customization of a Selenium code. So both are not same. But yes, based on the best practices, the JUnit has been developed, right? Some of the best practices are adapted when they were designing the TestNG framework, but two does two different tasks. Both does not do the same task. So if you see, this is the latest framework probably for some other session that it is been for the demonstration we did. So where you see there is the code being written that can validate different features of an Amazon website. Okay, so there is a test case 1, test case 2, as well as a test case 3. Okay, so let's open the 3 test cases. I don't have so much of time to walk through the code as such, but I'll high level explain what are the functionalities this code is going to do. It is a very simple code. The first code is going to search for a particular product, and the second code is to carry out a registration process, and the third code being written where it is going to validate some footer links that is present on the footer section of a page. So each one of these code is going to validate different functionalities. And you see all those methods, whatever it is being written within this class file is always annotated as @test. That is with test case 1 and the test case 2 and the test case 3. Primarily, if you see, there are some preconditions that are nothing but that has to run before this particular test and after the particular test case. So when I say a test case, all of them which has been labeled as TC1, TC2 and TC3. So if you look at a test base, right, it has certain amount of prerequisites that are being written, which we call it as a test fixtures, which are being maintained into a separate class that will enable me to invoke different types of browsers, launching the URL or instantiating the pages and so on, which is a page object model in which is incorporated. Okay. And finally, like, all the browsers that are being opened need to be terminated post completion of the test execution. So if you look at the whole lot of a code, whatever it is being written within these 4 class files that are opened, right? It is primarily using Selenium, TestNG, along with Java and different other APIs as well. So the same with the test base. Now, what did we do is that we have come up with the test execution can be independently performed, but though we created an XML file, right, which follows certain structure. As I explained about the structure over here, the test execution can be written as the suite. The suite can have one or more tests, and each test can have one or classes, and each class can have methods. Okay. So if you look at the XML file, initially it has a suite. The suite at the moment has 2 tests, that is the test 1 and the test 2. What does the test 1 says? It is going to have a test or a functional testing of Amazon, which is performed on the Edge browser. And you see everywhere I have enabled something called parallel. That is, it is going to do a parallel testing. Similarly, I have another test that has all the 3 classes, that is TC1, 2, and 3, which all of them will be exercised on the Chrome browser. Now, whilever it is running, right, both the test runs parallelly and it is going to perform on different set of browsers. One set of test is executed on the Edge parallelly. The other set of test is executed on the Chrome browser. So let's go ahead and trigger the execution here. It would be time taking because there are multiple browsers need to be triggered and then parallelly it has to run all of them. So you can see the Edge browsers are getting invoked and then followed with the Chrome browsers will be invoked and the execution will trigger. So it performs parallel testing also, it performs cross-browser testing. So the code once been written is customized such way it can run on any of the browsers to demonstrate cross-browser testing. And whenever it runs on the different browsers, right, it can be used for parallel testing also. The choice is yours, but if not, depends upon the bandwidth and the environment and the kind of an application and so on. This needs a high-end bandwidth while you run this parallelly. And you can see all the browsers are in the tray where it is started triggering the test execution. It will take some time to see the outcome. we would really need to wait for a while. I think there is some actions. If you see the code without any manual intervention, the code is being exercised. But this is completely because of Selenium along with TestNG, right? So post completion, I think like no, probably I'll show you how the TestNG results looks like.
Sorry, we can hear anything.
Hello, we are not able to hear the voice.
Am I audible now?
Yes, yes,
Yes.
Oh. Confirm if you are able to see the screen.
yes.
So if you see, post execution of this group of tests that it is executed parallelly on multiple browsers. See, there can be different browsers, but within this code, we have only a Chrome browser and the Edge browser. We can have the code being written for IE or different other browsers. So that is a choice of the test engineer. Okay, so where we can have a detailed report when you refer to the index.html, which gives me a clear indication on how all the methods that are executed. Well, so there is also something called a high-level emailable report, which is in like no, I would say the high-level a dashboard kind of a thing, which will enable the user to perceive, understand which are the test cases passed, and which are the test cases failed, or probably like which of them are skipped, and so on. Okay, so this is the I would say high level execution report. And if you see at test suite level, this has two tests. That is a functional test that is going to run on the Edge browser, another test which is going to run on the browser. Both of these tests has run parallelly, and each of the tests has three classes, that is test case 1, 2, and 3, and test case 1, 2, and 3. This I will have to correlate with your XML file, and you can trigger the test execution as your choice. If that answers about on how the parallel testing and the test execution can happen. If any more questions, please go ahead and ask. If not, I think we are good to wrap down.
Hello, ma'am.
Jyoti.
Yeah, hi.
Yeah, hi, this is Faik. So is parallel programming and parallel execution and cross browser execution same?
Actually, it can be even sequential, but I made it parallel here. Both are not
Okay.
same. Both are not same. You can run on a single browser parallelly, like 4-5 browsers you can run. Okay,
Yeah.
or a same application if you wanted to run on different browsers, that is a cross browser, parallelly or sequentially, it is your choice.
Okay, thank you.
Here it is both parallel and cross browser, both are demonstrated together, but it can be done individually. As again said, it is to the choice of a test engineer.
Okay, thank you.
Hello.
Okay, my question is how can we run only the failed test cases in test? Let's say we don't want to run all the test cases with the ones that have passed already, but want to run only the failed test cases. How can we do that in TestNG?
Yeah, actually, you can enable or disable the test cases. Probably we have a mechanism or a parameter, right? Where you can go ahead and disable. Now, let's say you do not, while your execution, you do not wanted to run this particular test case, you can keep that enabled to be false. So this test case, though it is being physically present at the time of execution, it will be disabled. It will be ignored. It will be ignored at the time of execution.
Okay, thank you.
Hello. Ma'am, if I am a newcomer and I want to whatever the framework I use to first of all try with this, whether a page model or hybrid I want to try.
See, hybrid model includes the page object model, data-driven testing, modular, keyword-driven, all put together, we call it as a hybrid. When I say page object model, right, I do not wanted you guys to consider that as a framework. Page object model is not a framework, it is a design pattern. So when I say what happens, the locators or the test object description, whatever we have, it can be either hard-coded, right? If it is hard-coded, it cannot be reused. So what am I going to do is that I'm going to apply page object model, which is one of my design pattern, and I'm going to isolate them and use them as much as it is needed. It is purely for reusability of your test object description. But don't see page object model as a framework. It is not a framework at all. It is only a design pattern.
Means it is given by the requirement of the company that this
It is not
design
about the
pattern.
company, it is about the test automation guidelines. Irrespective of any company you work for, right? They defaultly follow a hybrid framework.
Okay.
Now the framework, or let's say it is about the standards, how do you want it to? See, when I say a framework, right, it is purely the guidelines. Every organization have their own set of guidelines. But there are some generic guidelines. A page object model is a design pattern, okay? And if I may say, let's say a company X and company Y. Okay, style of doing may be different, style of creating the project may be different, but end of the day, what happens? They customize it according to the project need. It may change from business to business. You cannot do an eyeball comparison over there, right? So for this requirement, probably doing a data-driven framework may fit in. Or certain requirement, it may be a linear framework. For certain requirement, it can be XYZ framework. But any organization, if you see, right, it cannot only say using linear framework, my test automation is complete. Or if I use only data-driven framework, my test automation framework is complete. We use it in a proportion, right? When you put one or more framework concepts together or one or more guidelines when it is being considered together, we call it as a hybrid framework. So it is a customized model. Adjust it and tweak it according to your project needs. Now, even if I say like the organizations I work for, right? I have a project A and project B. I cannot say what is project A following the guidelines. It is not necessary the project B has to follow the same guidelines. It would have been customized according to their choice. So we cannot do that comparison.
Okay, I
But
get
what is globally followed is really very important.
it. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Any
Any
more
other comments?
questions, guys?
Hi. Sorry. Can you share the code on GitHub maybe?
Rosa, you mean to say, when you asking is GitHub covered as a part of the curriculum, or are you asking for something else from the GitHub?
Can you share the code, the automation code?
The automation code we can get during the training.
The current automation code which I have executed is certainly restricted. I don't think so I would be putting it across any of the global forums. It is only for a demonstration purpose, but probably like who could able to participate with the training, they will receive the GitHub link. This is not open for everyone. I'm sorry.
Okay, it's okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Arivu. Hi,
Go ahead, Karin.
can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah. Can you show us how to run the failed test cases?
I would explain, but I will not trigger the execution because it is time-taking process.
Okay.
So there is an XML file which will be created if at all any test. See, at the moment, there is no test failed. The test failed is because of configurational issues, not because the functional changes over here. So when you refer to the test-output over here, okay, so there will be an XML file which it would have created only for the failed test. Now, considering which are all the tests that it is being failed, we preferably go ahead. So if you see that initial test itself is being executed, like whichever the setup and the teardown itself was not successful, to proceed with the test case. Now, considering or understanding which are the tests we have failed, have been failed, we write a code which is for retry analysis. Okay. Now, when I say retry analysis, I am going to include and exclude only those tests that is being failed, that to be triggered probably twice or more, or as long as it is passed, or probably I can set up some recursive operation or an iterative process that can trigger the execution. I immediately, at the moment, I might not be able to demonstrate it just with the constraint of time. Okay, but it is through the retry analyzer. We have a interface as a class that we need to incorporate the code. We need to have a code written for it.
Okay, thank you.
Guys, may I request you to please submit your feedback on Google. It will help us, and definitely there are certain improvement items that you guys have shared. So we will implement in next webinar, right? So thank you for joining us. And if you have any other question, definitely we are here to answer. But requesting you to please share your feedback on Google. Any other question, guys? And I just want to inform you, like every month, guys, we have a technical webinar either in automation framework or TestNG, Cucumber, DevOps, Jenkins. So these are the topics. So please follow us on LinkedIn. And every month there are some hands-on sessions, some theoretical session, and workshop as well. Okay, so those all are the free webinar for 90 minutes. You guys can join depending on what you want to learn.
Like it's in once in a month, like one day we are taking.
Correct. Yeah. So every month, so in a month, there are two webinar. One is on DevOps topic, like Git, Jenkins, Kubernetes, right? And one on automation topic, like TestNG automation framework. So a lot of upcoming webinar. So you
Okay.
follow us on our page, LinkedIn page, and you will see a lot of upcoming technical webinar. Like last last month we did on the Selenium with Python. Okay, and prior to that we did on the Cucumber. So next month we are just working on the topic, and will come most probably will automation framework, how to design automation framework from scratch. Okay,
Like,
so we got a feedback on this webinar, like this should be more on the hands-on side, right? So definitely we will take care in the next time. Okay, so I know like you guys are expecting more and more hands-on, so definitely this is a feedback that I received. But theory is also the important aspect, because couple of you guys are new who don't know like what is a TestNG, what is the difference between TestNG and JUnit, right? Either this is a framework or this is a tool, what it is. So this is really important to understand, but definitely your feedback is always appreciated. Please go ahead. Okay, if we don't have any other question, thank you so much for joining, guys. Okay, requesting you to please share your feedback on Google. It will really motivate us, and really motivation for Jyoti. Okay, thank you. Have a great day, guys. Bye bye.
This is it. This is it. No! You got some range there. Oh, no! Guys, I don't want to die. Get him, Billy, get him! Let's go. 20 seconds, 20 seconds. He's out. Come on. Come on. 10 seconds.